Hello friends, welcome back. In the last video, we created a JWT util class that will be responsible for generating the JWT token, validating the JWT token, and extracting the username from the JWT token. So in this video, we are going to work on auth token filter. Remember, we have talked about filters and filter chains. So in this particular lesson, we are going to talk about auth token filter. Auth token filter, and basically auth token filter is a filter that processes the incoming requests. It extracts and validates JWT tokens and set the authentication object in the security context holder. Do you remember this diagram? This diagram, we covered it in the theory part, and if you have not yet watched my previous video, I recommend you to go back and watch. We said that after loading the username from the DB and also verifying that everything is okay, an authentication object is created, is updated, and then stored in the security context. So in this case, the filter responsible for that is that is the filter that we are going to create called auth token filter. So this auth token filter, I have said that it is a filter that processes incoming requests, extracts and validates JWT tokens, and then sets the authentication object in the security context holder. So I want us to create this, and basically this filter runs once per request. That is why during the implementation you are going to see that it extends once per request filter. Also, it extracts the JWT from the request header. And if the JWT is valid, it loads the user details and sets the authentication in the security context holder. So let us create a new Java class. This class, I am going to call this auth token filter. Auth token filter. So this auth token filter, I am going to annotate this with add component. So this one, it extends once per request filter. It extends once per request filter. So we are going to implement the methods that is do filter chain internal. So this do filter chain internal is a method that we are going to extend. This method is the one that does the actual filtering. So basically what we are going to do is I want to inject several things. The first thing that I want to inject is JWT util. So I am going to say private JWT utils JWT utils. The other thing that I am going to add is private user details service implementation, user details service IMPL, because I want to get the user details. So I can use at autowired, or I can also use the final to do the constructor injection. So let me inject this into my constructor. So this one has been injected into my constructor. Then I want to do the login. Of course, I will do some login. So I will go inside my JWT util class and copy this inside my auth token filter. I will copy this, but then this one I will replace this with auth token filter dot class. Now I want us to go to my do internal and start now the actual filtering. So this one through several exception. So basically, the very first thing that I want us to do is to create some try and catch block. We create some try and catch block. So we can use our logger dot debug. Say this is auth token filter. So you can say auth token filter code for URL. This just logger. So we get the URL from request dot get request URI. Now we create our try catch block. Create our try catch block here. So our try and catch block here. So basically, our catch will just return or throw an exception. It is good to handle exceptions well, most especially for Spring Boot application. So I will say logger.error, and inside this I can say it cannot set user authentication. Cannot set user authentication. Cannot set user authentication. Then I want to get to display the exception. Okay, all right, let us continue. Now let me write my logic here. So inside here I am going to say string JWT is equals to, I'm going to create a method called pass JWT that will extract the JWT from header. So inside here I'm going to pass the request. Let me create this method. So this string pass JWT. So inside here the first thing is to define a string. Define a string JWT is equals to JWT utils dot get JWT from header. I pass the request. So then I will then return the JWT string. So return JWT. So I am done with pass JWT. Then after that I will continue with the rest of the method. So here I'm going to check a condition. If JWT is not equal to null, if JWT is not equal to null and JWT utils dot validate token, so I want to validate this JWT token. So from up to that point, so what do I do? Now I want to get the username. So I will say string username is equals to JWT utils dot get username from token JWT. Then say user details is equals to user details service. So I think we need to import the user details service. So basically, let us call the Spring Boot user detail service. User detail service. Basically, we created this user detail service. I can see we have it here. So basically, user detail service dot road user by username, and I will pass my username there. Then after that, I am going to create an authentication object. So I will say username password authentication token, username password authentication token, and I will call this object authentication because I am creating an authentication object is equals to new username password authentication token. So basically it was supposed to be token, not filter. I am not creating a filter, but I am creating an authentication object with the help of username password authentication token. So here I will pass various things. The first thing that I will pass is null for the principal, then user details dot get authorities, and there I have my authentication object. I told you more about the principles and the rest. So I will then say authentication dot set details. So I will say new web authentication details. So new web authentication details source dot build details. Then inside here I will pass the request. Let me put this on a separate line for readability. Then I will store the authentication object on the security context. So I will say security context holder, dot get context dot set authentication. I will pass my authentication object. Then I am done. So I will go to my cache. So my cache is done. Then remember this is filter, and I need to pass on filter to the next filter chain. So for you to pass or to pass the filter to the next filter chain, you just call filter chain dot do filter request response, and I am done with this. So basically this is all about auth token filter. That is all about auth token filter. And I want to explain this code briefly. I told you that I had already told you that the purpose of this auth token filter. So I now just want to go through this code one more times for more clear understanding. So I told you that the auth token filter is a filter that processes the incoming requests It extracts and validates JWT tokens and sets the authentication in the security context holder. So the security context holder will store the authentication object for the duration of the request. So basically, this filter implement or extends one per request filter. Uh, this is uh, this is provided by Spring Security, and so therefore we have a security that we have a method that we are going to override called do filter internal. So basically, let us go through this method. So we have begun by creating a method called pass JWT. So this pass JWT gets the token from the authorization header. It basically gets the token from the authorization header. Okay, so that is the first step. The first step was to get the token from the authorization header. Then the next step is to validate. This step is to validate the JWT token. Validate the username. So we are validating that this token is not null, and this JWT token is not expired. Remember, the JWT util.validate JWT tokens checks whether the token is valid in terms of the token is not tampered with, the token is not expired, and the token has not malformed. And if we go past this step, then we can extract the username using JWT util.get username from JWT token. This is a method that we created to extract username from the JWT token. After that, we will create an authentication object. We create an authentication object. So basically, before that, we wrote, and inside the authentication object, we have to pass the user's details. That is why we are calling user detail service implementation dot road user by username. We pass the username we are getting from the token. Then we create an authentication object with the help of username, password, authentication token. So then we pass the credentials. So we pass the principal, we also pass the authorities. Then after that, we store or we pass or we attach that authentication object to the security context holder to establish authentication. So to establish authentication. Then I have said to continue processing the request, you call the filter chain.do filter request and response. So this ensures that your filtering does not stop at that point. It does not stop at that point. So friends, this is all about auth token filter. Remember, these are very important class with regard to JWT. It's a very important class with regard to JWT. Now I want us to create another class to handle unauthorized. Remember, we need to keep the status of the user's request. If the user is not authorized to access our system, basically we need to return error 401 stating that a user needs to be authorized. How can we do that? We can do that with the help of JWT entry point. So let us create another filter. New filter. I will call this auth entry point JWT. Entry point JWT. Auth entry point JWT. And the purpose of this is to handle unauthorized access, e.g. invalid or missing token. It will return a 401 unauthorized response with JSON error details. So let us create this method, or rather let us create this class, and this one will basically implements authentication entry point. So let us annotate this with at component. It will implement an interface called authentication entry point. So implements authentication entry point. Authentication entry point. So for authentication entry point, as the name suggests, the authentication entry point is to check whether the user is authenticated. And if the user is not authenticated, just return a 4 or 1. So let us continue. Now, it is good to have some sort of login. So I will go to auth token filter and copy this log across. After copying that log across, I will pass it inside my second filter, which is auth entry point filter. Auth entry point filter. Therefore, I will start with the login. So I will say logger.error, maybe unauthorized. I want to log an authorized error. Unauthorized error, and of course I provide the details. So I will say auth exception dot get message. Auth exception dot get message. It will give us the exact message. Then we have the response. So I will say response dot set content type. I will set the content type to be application JSON. So I will say media type dot application. Oh, sorry, not page attribute, but media type. Media type. This media type will come from, so we cannot resolve this. I don't know why we cannot get the media type, and it is supposed to import the media type from Spring Framework HTTP. Spring Framework HTTP. So so I will just try to add application JSON value. Application media type dot application JSON value. So that is the media type. Yeah, it is importing the media type from the correct class. So this will display the result as JSON. Response dot set status. Response dot set status. The status should be unauthorized. HTTP servlet request response HTTP servlet response dot CS unauthorized. CS hyphen unauthorized. So when a person is not yet authenticated, the error should be unauthorized. Then I will create a map body. I will create a map body to format my response well. So I will say final map of string. It will have string as key and object as value. I will call this body is equals to new hash map. New hash map. We import map from java.util.map. New hash map. Then say body dot put. What do I want in the body? I want to have a key called status, and what will be the value? So I will say http servlet response.cs unauthorized. What else do I need in this map? I also need error message body.put error, because this has something to do with error. So I am creating error friendly response. So I will put the message unauthorized. This will be the error message. Then of course we need to put the message body.put the message. The actual message should be http servlet. So auth exemption, let me get this from auth exemption dot get message. And finally I want to add the path body dot put. So the path will be from the request dot get servlet path, request dot get servlet path. Now I want to convert my map to a JSON, and I am going to use object mapper provided by Jackson. I am going to use object mapper provided by Jackson. Therefore, I am going to say final object mapper is equals to new object mapper. Now I want to convert my map to a JSON. So I will say mapper dot write value response dot get output stream comma body. And I am done with this method. This method is very short as you can see. Basically, that is all about authentication entry point. So, and basically this extends authentication entry point, and this is a Spring Security interface that is triggered when an authenticated user tries to access a protected resource. So basically, we want to create a customer-friendly message to the user. That is why we are creating all this. The next thing is to create a filter called custom access denied handler. The purpose of this is to check whether authenticated user have got permission to do some activities, or rather, remember I told you from the beginning that whatever we are implementing is role-based authentication and authorization. So if for example, a user has been successfully authenticated and this authentication entry point filter passes, what will be the next filter? The next filter is to check what can this authenticated user do into the system. If the user tries to do an activity in which the user have no permission, what filter shall we call to return error 403, telling the user that you are forbidden to do that action, or you are restricted from performing that action. Here is where custom access handler comes into place. Therefore, I am going to create a new Java class, and I am going to call it custom access denied handler. And this implements custom denied handler. It implements access denied handler. And this interface has got a method called custom access denied handler. So this is the method. So we are going to overwrite the handle method. This method, handle method, we are going to implement this method here. So basically, what do we want to achieve? It is same things. It is exactly the same thing as what we have achieved with auth token filter, but now I want to format the request. So basically, I will say response dot set content type. So I will say application JSON application JSON value application hyphen JSON hyphen value application JSON value. So and this one will come from media type dot application JSON value. So let me import this media type. The other thing that I need to set is response.status. Response.status. So status will be forbidden. Set status forbidden, which is CS forbidden, or rather HTTP status 403. HTTP servlet response dot CS underscore forbidden. So friends, I hope you are doing these things practically, because I believe that just following theoretically will not help you. It will not help you. You will understand the theory, you will get the theory, but the hands-on skill. So it is good to do these things practically. So basically, I want us to import this hash map. Then I want to copy everything that we did from auth token not auth token filter authentication entry point. I want to do everything here. Have created a body. Then I want to say body.set. We are setting the status to CS forbidden. We also want to set the error to be forbidden. That means that you are restricted, cannot perform that action. Okay, then this forbidden is a string. Messages, the message that I want to set here is access denied. Message, you don't have permission. So I want to write some custom error message. You don't have permission to access this request. You don't have permission to perform this action. Maybe you are trying to delete, so it should tell you that you don't have permission to do the deletion. It is good to do all these checks. Then the path and everything will remain the same. Everything will remain the same. So basically, that is it. That method is a straightforward method. It's a straightforward method. It is a straightforward method. So now I want us to go to how do we join these pieces of code? How do we join these pieces of code? So, or rather, my question is, how do we enforce these filters? How do we enforce these filters? How do we enforce this filter? We can enforce this filter at the configuration level, Spring config level. So I want us to create a class called security config. Class called security config. So let us create a class called security config inside my config file. So I want to create new Java class. I will call this security config. Security config. So this is a configuration class. So basically, this security config class is a Spring security configuration for handling authentication and authorization in a Spring Boot application using JSON Web Token. It defines security rules, authentication filters, password encoding, course policies, and exemption handling. Those are some of the things that we are going to do. So the very first thing is to mark this, annotate this with at configuration. What is the significance of this? The significance of this is it marks this class as a Spring configuration class. Then I want us to add another one called enable web security. Enable web security. This is for enabling web security. Then another annotation. Remember, this will be a role-based authentication and authorization. So I will say enable method security. Enable method security. Enable method security. So I will enable method security, and inside here I want to say, I want to pass various parameter. I will say pre I will say pre-post enabled true, secured enabled true, JRS 250 enabled true, JR JSR 250 enabled true. So basically, you may be wondering, what are these? So I want to explain this. So at enable, method security enables method level security. So pre-post enabled true enables an annotation called at pre-authorized. Remember, when we were talking about theory, we talked about pre-authorized. So enabling this will allow us to use that annotation. Then there is secured enabled true. This will enable at secured. And finally, there is JSR 250 enabled true. This will enable annotation code roars aloud. Annotation code roars aloud. I hope up to that point we are together. Now I want to call or rather to inject the filters that we have created. So I will say private final. We have created several filters. We have created auth entry point JWT, auth entry point JWT. We have also created another filter called auth token filter, auth token filter, auth token filter, and therefore this one I am going to add them. So basically, this one I will add this as a bin. Let me add this auth entry point JWT as a constructor. Let me inject this as a constructor. And after this, I want to add a bin. So at bin, so you know what is the purpose of a bin. So public auth token filter. I will call this auth token filter, and basically I will return new auth token filter. Let me import this bin. Return new auth token filter. Return new auth token filter. So basically, this auth token filter cannot be applied to create constructor. So auth token filter. No, let me remove the constructor. So let me go back to my security config. Want to know why it is misbehaving. Why it is misbehaving. I want to know basically why is this misbehaving. So because it requires me to create a constructor. It requires me to create a constructor. So let us try creating a constructor inside our auth token filter. Inside our auth token filter. But I think the reason, I know the reason why this is misbehaving. So the reason why this could be misbehaving because inside here we also have a constructor. Let me see what will be, how this code will behave. Yes, that is why it is misbehaving. So instead of using a constructor, why don't we use auto-wired? Why don't we use auto-wired? Why don't we use an auto-wired for all this? So basically this one for Roger will remain as it is, but for these two I am going to remove this final and I am going to auto-wire them. At auto-wired, I am also going to auto-wire this at auto-wired, and I am going to remove this constructor injection. So I think there is something that I have removed accidentally. I have removed this. So let me add auto-wired. At auto-wired, this is a notation that is used for dependency injection. And I think I am done with this. I am done with this. Now I can go to my security config. Now I have defined all these beans. I can also do auto wiring here. Created, or I have injected my filters. So what else? What is the next thing that I want to do? The next thing that I want to do is to create a filter chain, security filter chain. So I am going to create a bean at bean. So inside this bean, I want to create a method public security filter chain. So inside here, I'm going to pass HTTP security. I will call this HTTP. Then custom access denied handler. I want to put it inside there. Custom access denied handler. So remember, this is a filter that we have, and this should throw exception. Should throw an exception. Now I want to put things in order. So this one is complaint could not auto, no bean of custom access denied handler. So because it is saying no bean, so basically what do we do? Have we defined this as a component? custom access denied handler. No, it should be annotated with that component so that it can be detected as a bin. Okay, now I want to expand my screen and continue with my code. So basically, what I am going to do, I am going to do several things, and this is very important when it comes to Spring Security. So I will explain this code: http dot authorize http request. So inside here I will pass request. This is a lambda function. So let me use request. It's a lambda function. So the first thing, request dot request matches. So I want to list here all the endpoints that I want to permit, or rather the endpoints that you can hit without requiring authentication. Right? For example, it does not make sense that you need to be logged in to log in. It also does not make sense that you need to be logged in to create an account. Therefore, we need to remove such kind of things here. So I will say any path that is from API slash v1 slash auth slash public slash or dot permit or. So that means that any endpoint that it has got this API v1 auth public. Like for example, I can say API v1 auth public login. This should be permitted. API v1 auth public sign up. This should be permitted. Okay? Yes. Then I will say dot any request dot authenticated. Any request dot authenticated. Any other request should be authenticated. Any other request should be authenticated. Any other request should be authenticated. Then dot exception handling. Exception handling. So I want to pass exception. This is an arrow function. So I want to say exception dot authentication entry point. Authentication entry point. So what is our authentication entry point? So at this point we are handling filters, our filters. Now the first filter is auth entry point JWT. Auth entry point JWT. I will also say dot access denied handler. It should also check whether uh, you are authenticated as custom access denied handler. Then I will then continue and add more filters. Dot I will continue and add more filters. Add more filters. Dot add filter before. So I want to add a filter before. So authentication JWT. So I want to auth token filter, and this one is of type username, password authentication filter, username, password authentication filter. Remember I explained to you what is the purpose of this filter. The purpose of this filter is to intercept the request and do the authentication and create the authentication object, and then call call the authentication manager and pass that authentication object dot CSRF. So I want us to disable cross-site request forgery. This is an attack. So inside here I will say abstract method, abstract HTTP configurer, then disable. This is a method reference introduced in Java 8. Then I also want to disable CORS. CORS stands for Cross Origin Request Forgery. CORS. So I will say CORS. For now, I don't want to disable CORS for now. Let this filter come later. Let this filter come later. You will see the importance of this filter, most especially when we are dealing with front end. So I will say return http.build. So we are going to return http.build. So what is this saying? Something must be weird. How many brackets do I need to close? Okay. So dot authentic username password authentication dot csrf dot disable. Okay. So I was supposed to close this. So we shall know why this one is not closing yet. Expected. So where is this expected? It's expected there. Now I am done with my security config. So there are other things that we will need. For example, for us to create passwords. If for example, the next lecture will be now doing the actual authentication and user creation and seeing how we return a JWT token. But now we will create some users into our database. But how should we store our password? We are supposed to store our password as hash. And therefore, we are going to create a bean called bcrypt password encoder. At bean, this is public bcrypt password encoder. Call this password encoder, and inside here I am going to return new bcrypt password encoder. Bcrypt password encoder. The purpose of this is for encoding the password. Okay, encoding the password. Now I think the other thing that I will need to do is to create authentication manager. I will create another bean called authentication manager, because I know it will be used to do the actual authentication. So I will create a bean and I will call this. Remember, I told you the purpose of authentication manager is to delegate authentication to one or more authentication provider. And the example of authentication provider is DAO authentication provider. So this authentication manager is the one that contains the method authenticate. So public authentication manager. So I will say authentication configuration is equals authentication configuration. So basically this one is supposed to be inside my authentication manager, supposed to be inside there, so that at this point I want to return it. So I will say return authentication configuration dot get authentication manager So this one should throw an exemption. So add exception to the method signature. Throws exemption. So basically, friends, that is it for this video. In the next video, we are going to create an endpoint to authenticate a user and to create an account so that we can test all these. But if you have not understood this code, I will take you through this code once again. So authentication token filter is a bin. It's a customer filter that extract and validate JWT token from the incoming request. And we also have auth JWT entry point. This is a filter that we created. It's a custom class that handles unauthorized request for O1 errors. Then we go on and request matches allows. So this one, this part here allows access to public authentication routes, e.g. login and registration. So, and then any other requests will require authentication. Then we will go to exemption handling. This is the exemption handling. This exemption handling does several things. The first one is to handle unauthorized. It handles unauthorized access or 401. It also handles forbidden access. So this part, exemption handling, will handle unauthorized entry point and forbidden. Then we will also add filter. We add auth token filter before username password authentication filter to process JWT based authentication. So because we want to process JWT based authentication, we need to add auth token filter before username password authentication filter. Then the other step is CSRF protection is disabled because JWT is used instead of session. Because we are not using session, let us disable CSRF protection. Then finally, we return that object. So authentication manager, as I have explained to you, is used to authenticate user. This one is used to authenticate user. So that is all for this video. Let us meet in the next video. So friends, if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe, like my videos, and share widely, and hit the bell icon so that whenever I post an update, you will be updated. Thank you. See you in the next video.